Welcome to everyone. This is the third in our series of uh, meet and greets with Congressional District 2 candidates. And today is Chris Vaughn. And Chris, why don't you tell folks about yourself?
Okay, well, first of all, thanks for having me on. I appreciate the opportunity to tell you why I decided to run. Um, I'll give you a little bit about my background. I grew up in Iowa, and then my family moved to Oregon in 1987, so I've lived in Bend since then. I did leave to go back to Iowa to go to college, and while I was in college there, they had the Iowa caucuses, which I participated in, and uh, I was a big supporter of Bill Clinton at the time. This was back when he first ran in 1990, 91 for the 92 election. And I started a student group, Students for Clinton. And I got to meet Bill Clinton when he came to Iowa. And I was really supportive of him. Then after I graduated from college, I had thought about running for office myself, but kind of gave up on the idea. Was just involved with trying to do a career and work. And then as the years went by, I got kind of disillusioned with politics and didn't really want to be involved with it much. It just seemed really frustrating that a lot of politicians just didn't seem to be working for the people, what I call the working class people. Then in 2016, I was reinvigorated by it a lot with Bernie Sanders' campaign. I really like a lot of the progressive ideas that he pushes forward, and it really inspired me to get involved again. And then I've seen a lot of other really progressive candidates that have entered races and won election recently, like Alexandria Ocasio. And so I was really inspired by that. And I just decided, well, I'm going to give this a shot myself too, and I'm going to push these same progressive values. So one reason is that I think Congress should look like the people it represents, and that includes like different ethnicities, different religious backgrounds, the LGBT community. But I also think it includes what I call working class people, where most of Congress right now is either millionaires or very wealthy individuals. And I would like to see more working class people get elected. But it's very difficult to do because who has the ability to take off work if they don't have much financial means in order to run a congressional race? So it's a big challenge, but I wanted to try and do it, and that's why I'm here. And a lot of the values I'm fighting for, I'm really strong for Medicare for all. I think that's one of the most important things in our country right now. And with what's going on with the coronavirus, I really feel like it's kind of highlighting that we really have a lack of healthcare for a lot of people in America today. And I think as the only industrial country that doesn't have a single payer system or some kind of Medicare for all system, I think we're really behind the times on that. I also am really strong, and I want to fight for a Green New Deal. I feel like we need to be transitioning from fossil fuels to more sustainable economy, and we can provide a lot of better paying jobs by having people transition to that kind of economy. I think it's really important that we fight climate change, and we need to rejoin the Paris Agreement. There's so much more that we should be doing, and I just feel like we're just really not getting it done as far as that area goes. I'm also very concerned about things like immigration reform. I think that what has happened in the last couple of years with families being separated is just totally unacceptable, and we need to put an end to that. And so I think we need to do a lot of reform as far as immigration goes. And those are that's just a few of the main things that I really want to fight for. And I guess I'll just leave it at that and just kind of try and answer questions from whatever anybody has questions for me.
All righty, great. So anybody that has a question, please raise your hand. virtually if you can. So I see that Helen has got a question. You got in there first, Helen. So I'm going to unmute you, and you may go ahead now.
Hi, Chris.
Hello.
Thank you for making the effort to do this and promote your values. My question is, how are you going to contextualize those issues for Congressional District 2? They all have a local spin and a local framework. And so how do you see discussing some of those issues for this district, which is quite diverse?
Yes, well, one thing is I'm glad the district seems to be getting more diverse, and like I just noticed recently that I think it's in Bend or Deschutes County that Democrats surpassed Republicans for the first time, and so that's an encouraging sign to me. And I think it's great that it's an open seat right now, because I think that gives us a lot better chance with incumbent there. One thing is, like, as far as the climate change goes, we've all seen firsthand how the forest fires have affected us in this area the last few years. It's just been so difficult, to go outdoors a lot of times with the thick smoke in there and everything. And I believe that that's partly a cause of the climate change and the warmer climate and the drying out of the forest. I also think we could do better at managing the forest to do thinning and stuff like that, controlled burns. That's one reason why I would be interested in being on the agricultural committee to oversee like what has to do with the forest and like natural resources. So that's kind of some of the areas that I would like stress, like, how it's actually affecting us right here. Well, another issue would be water. I mean, our water is going to be really important as the climate keeps warming. We're going to have, stress on the water supply. And so anything in that area would also be something that I would be pushing.
Okay. Helen, do you have any follow-up on that, or was that good? Okay. Next up in the queue is Gloria. You're on, Gloria.
Okay, thank you so much, Chris, and thank you for being here and standing up for our values. I have a couple of big issues that you have really put your name on. One of them being agriculture, and the other being healthcare. And I truly believe that with this pandemic, I might say, on a personal note, I'm now entering week 5 in being in this house, and I have a lot of time to think, and you can't imagine what I've dreamed up in those hours. So going back to my question, on the agricultural committee, I'm really interested in seeing food security elevated. Now, one of the things which we've cut back on in recent years has been research in all areas. And I think that as a member of the agricultural committee, it would be important for you to put some bones on research and the food supply and making it more possible for, shall I say, agricultural subsidies to be devoted to food that we use every day. And that's something which I've been thinking a lot about. The other thing which I really wonder about is healthcare. You say you're really focusing on Bernie's program, the Medicare for All. I think that we need to focus on healthcare for all, which includes rural communities with hospitals, public health, the reasons that we are having hospitals in this area threatened by what I would call lack of financing because of inadequate resources. So I'd like to have your thoughts, if you would, please, on research and elevating food and water as a part of a really important part of the Department of Agriculture, or a special space on the board of directors for this nation, and the changing of the healthcare systems in these rural areas and reinforcing those systems so that they can stay alive and vital in the face of what's going on and what's going to be happening in the future, because there's this notion we're going to go back to where we were. Well, that's not going to happen. We have to find new ways to live in this environment. So thank you. I hope you understood the questions.
I think so, yeah. Well, I think that food safety is very important, and I think a lot of people are concerned about that nowadays. You can see by the way people try to buy special foods in the store, and a lot of different specialty foods have become more popular in the last few years. I really don't like the way a lot of the big corporations seem to try and be dominating, like as far as like the seed supply goes, with like the GMO products. I think that people should have an option, and I don't like how it's being forced on people a lot of times, mainly by the seed companies trying to monopolize things where they want to put the genetic type seeds out there. I try to buy non-GMO stuff myself, and I think that we ought to have that option. I also think that testing is very important. Like I've seen where, like in the slaughterhouses and stuff, where they've cut back on testing and having U.S. government officials that are in there to oversee, to make sure that things are being done the way they're supposed to be. I've read where they're doing some of it by camera now, where they just monitor it by camera and they don't even have a person there checking things out. And so I think that's by cutting things short like that, we're looking for trouble in the food supply at some point. What was the other part of it? Was about the
healthcare system.
The healthcare system, yeah, that's right.
Reinforcing the healthcare system of this rural. See, I think that you can really speak to this district about healthcare and about food security, because how many people live in what I would call a healthcare island or a food island? And so this is something which you could really take on as a part of what I would call the needs as you see it for those working people of this district. So thank you.
Well, as far as the healthcare system goes, I think that by having a Medicare for all system, I think that does strengthen the rural areas, because we're not worried about profit so much then, because the government is going to be taking over that system. Then it wouldn't be as big an issue, I don't feel like, in the rural areas then, as far as profit goes. But I mean, I'm open to looking at other ideas too, where you have like a combination of a single payer with private health insurance too. But I just think the single payer is the best way to go, and I think it would be the most stable for all areas of the country as far as urban and rural areas go.
Could I just say one more thing, please?
Mm-hmm.
I see healthcare as being not only the insurance and the ability to get healthcare, but it's also the availability of that healthcare. To have physicians and the rest of the, shall I say, the professional community available, and to have the departments available, whether it be hospitals or the county health department, that they'd be vital, and have the staff to respond to those needs of these additional individuals who are coming in for healthcare. It's a bigger picture than health insurance, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, I think it's very important to try and give incentives for doctors to serve rural communities. I mean, that's really important, because if a lot of doctors are going to go to the bigger cities where they think they can make more money and everything, and so there has to be incentives for them to want to go live in rural areas and work in rural areas. And I think that there's things that can be done to give incentives to doctors to do that. And one area might be through immigration reform. There's a lot of doctors that want to come work this country that are from other countries that are willing to go to rural areas. And if we could improve our immigration system, then I think that would help in that area as well.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Okay, great. So just so we know, currently in the queue, next up is going to be Nancy. Then I'm going to read a question from the chat from Connie, and after that will be Greg. So right now, Nancy, you are on.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris, for coming and meeting with us.
Sure.
I'm just curious as to who you are talking. I think I'm stepping on Connie's question a little bit, but I thought of it before you put it in the queue, Connie. So I'm just curious as to who you've been talking to throughout this district, what leaders throughout the district you're talking to understand the local problems that they're facing. It's a large district and has a lot of complex issues, throughout it. So if you could just share who you're talking with and what you're learning.
Well, it's been really difficult because I got in the campaign kind of late. I had just pretty much entered, just before the deadline came. And so I didn't really go out and meet very many people in the district prior to that. And when I finally made the decision to enter the race, everything basically started shutting down from the coronavirus and that. So I really haven't had a lot of opportunity to speak with as many people as I would like. I got a lot of stuff coming up where I'm doing different forums with different groups and answering questionnaires for different groups from different areas of the district. Like I got something coming up with Josephine County Democrats and Wasco County Democrats in Eastern Oregon. And so I'm trying to make some inroads by meeting and talking with people in those areas. But yeah, the way everything's shut down with things being really isolated, it's been very difficult since I didn't already have those contacts prior to running. Then it's a lot harder now trying to do that as we're going through what we're going through now.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, all righty. No follow-up, Nancy? You good?
I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, great. So next up, we have Connie had two questions. One of them was one that Nancy asked, although specifically she was wondering about activist groups that you might have worked with locally or spoken to. And then the other question, she was interested, what was it that you studied in college?
Okay. Well, when I was in college, I got a degree in teaching. So my specialty area was social studies. So teaching government and U.S. history and economics. But I did not go into teaching though after I graduated. I ended up going into other areas of work. And so basically I've worked as like a general manager for a small grocery, and then also in the last many years I've worked as a sales representative for a distribution company called DPI Northwest. And as far as activist groups go, I work with a lot of it was when I was younger in college. I'm doing the Students for Clinton, and I was also a member of United Students of Iowa. I was elected to that position, and I worked as a lobbyist doing that. As a student, I worked as a lobbyist lobbying the state legislature and the Board of Regents in Iowa as far as student concerns go for public school students. And had experience doing that. And then in the last few years, I've mostly, it's been just through participation in things that I'm interested in, like going to climate marches and women's marches, and participating in the Earth Day every year in Bend. I usually participate there, handing out literature. Those are all things that I've been really interested in. I've also helped out a local group in Bend called VegNet Bend, which advocates a plant-based diet as far as like the environment goes. I'm not all plant-based myself, but I do try to eat a lot of plant-based items, and so I participate with things with that group a lot of times.
Okay, thanks. Let's move on to our next question, and that will be coming from Greg Heacock. So Greg, hang on, let me get you unmuted here. There you go, you're on.
So, yeah. I should be on, okay? So Chris, many years ago when the Citizens Party started up, and this was at the time of Jimmy Carter being in office and running for another term, I I got involved in politics and I jumped into a race. So I'm interested in what it is that prompts a person to actually run for office, as you are doing now. I'm looking at your background and I see that you worked with Safeway as a shift manager up to about 2006, and then you have the business that you've been doing.
Mhm.
And I understand from what you're saying that you have an interest in Bernie's campaign, which could account for your jumping in at this time. But what has, you haven't mentioned Obama, like skipped over that as far as being involved in politics at that time. So what is it that has caused you to run at this time? What's prompted this? I think everyone's got their own journey, and I really respect that. But I
Sure,
want to know what your journey is.
sure.
I'm curious.
Well, yeah, I did. When Obama ran in 2008, I was very enthusiastic about his campaign and helped out with that and making phone calls and stuff. I was really excited about him when he ran, and obviously I like Barack Obama, but there was some things that I felt like he didn't do enough of. I just, to me, I'm more progressive leaning, and I felt like a lot of things he campaigned for in 2008, I didn't feel like he really carried through on. Like one thing he really campaigned on was not having lobbyists working in his government, and then one of the first things he did was went and got a bunch of lobbyists to work in the positions in his government. And so that to me was like more of the same old thing that we've already had. And I know that sometimes you got to have some people working in your government that have experience, but it's just that I just didn't feel like he did enough of what he said he was going to do. And I totally, now that Bernie's dropped out of the race, I'm totally in support of, obviously I'm totally in support of Joe Biden, but I just want to push things further to the left. I feel like Joe Biden is going to be a lot like Barack Obama was, and I just want to push things further to the left. And I'm hoping that by more progressive candidates running and hopefully getting elected, that we can push that narrative further to the left. And I guess, what prompts me to get in? Well, it's a lot of work. It's really hard to do. And when you don't have a lot of resources that people, that might have more money or have had experience in the past, it's a difficult thing. But I did it because I see these young children that I know, family members that I think, what is their world going to be like? We need to make some changes, because what's going to happen if we don't start work towards the climate change issue like now? We should have been doing it 10 years ago, but we haven't even been doing some of the stuff that I feel like we should have did 10 years ago. And I just feel like that I have to do this for future generations. I'm willing to sacrifice and do what I have to do to try and run and hopefully get elected to do this for future generations.
So I've got follow-up then. I agree with your assessment of the Obama administration in that sense. I had a post-Obama group in support of him until it came to healthcare and the folding on that. So all of us have had our own issues with reassessment. So I'm really pleased to hear that from you. But your background in education raises another question for me, or as far as how to pose a larger question. Okay. So much about aspirational politics is about where we want to go. And yet legislation by itself means next to nothing except as it is implemented properly. So you can spend a lot of money on education and make no changes whatsoever, which could probably pretty much characterize what's happened over the last 20 years at least, 30 years. What would you do, given the educational system of Oregon and the complexity within the rural area of Oregon and having kids educated properly and staying in schools? How would you apply the funds that come into Oregon for education to make this more successful? I understand that's not your job, but I believe that legislators in Congress have an obligation to work with legislators in the state to make sure that the money that's sent to them is put to good use. So what's your thoughts on that, if you would?
Well, first of all, I would want to find out more of what the teachers want, because I think, you know, the teachers are on the front lines. They're the ones that are teaching these kids every day. We seem to spend an awful lot of money, but don't get a lot of the results that some other countries seem to get. So I think that one thing I like to see is, like, and then that I've noticed about Ben, is that there's to be a lot of different options, a lot of different charter schools and such that that provide different options. And I think that there isn't always a one size fits all for children to learn. Different children learn better in different environments. And I think that it's good going in the direction of having the various options available to parents. And I would like to see, you know, a lot of the money put towards that, towards developing those areas. I know that I have a good friend that I've seen the process that she went through getting her young daughter into school, who, you know, just started kindergarten this last fall and was in preschool prior to that. And I saw the problems she had trying to find a good preschool, and just like, especially the preschools are just not available. It doesn't seem like in this area, there's just not enough of them to meet parent demands. And I think it's really important that kids, even at that young of age, they're, you know, a lot of the biggest years for them are before they're 7 years old. And so they really need that preschool environment. And, but I did see this particular child get into a good school, and she really enjoys the school she's at. And I would like to see more of that variety for different students to learn in the way that's best for them.
Good. And for Spanish-speaking students?
Yes, exactly. The child that I'm talking about is actually comes from a Hispanic family that is trying to learn both languages. So she speaks English right now, but she wants to learn Spanish because that's what a lot of her family also speaks. And so, yeah, I would definitely like to see much more Spanish in the schools.
Good. Thank you very much.
And I just would like to say too, I think that the teachers just, they just aren't supported enough, because I think I just can't conceive like how in the United States in this day and age that we have teachers that are having to use their own money to buy supplies for students. That's just crazy. The schools and the government should be providing that.
Yes, it would be nice to see that kind of happen. And also, I just add, I think that professional development, if it were collegial professional development and salaries went up as you got more and more educated, rather than relying on teachers learning on the job, because a lot of the learning on the job is just crowd control. And there's so much more to do in terms of educating students. Thanks an awful lot, Chris.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Greg. Let's move on. Next up in the queue is Joanne. Go, Joanne.
Hi, all. Good morning. I actually have a very similar question to the one that just popped on the chat. Given that this district, I mean, there's traditionally Republican, and there is a lot of momentum going within, you know, that group in the community. What are your strategies to bring folks that may have not traditionally voted Democrat while upholding progressive values?
Well, I think, I mean, that's difficult to do in this district because it is a, you know, a big conservative district as far as like there's a much higher percentage of Republicans usually. That I think it's a plus 15 district they call it, where it's usually wins by about 15 points. So yeah, we have a long road in front of us as far as being able to get a Democrat elected in the fall. I think that by being united within the party and supporting the whole ticket, with including like Joe Biden, and hopefully getting a big turnout in the fall, I'm hopeful that because of the way things are going right now, that people are just going to be really dissatisfied with Donald Trump, and that they're going to want to vote Democrat in the fall, and hopefully that'll carry on to the congressional candidate as well. I think that, you know, a lot of conservatives like to talk about family values, and I think pushing the things that I'm talking about as family values. I think that the Green New Deal is a family value because it's pushing living wage jobs for Americans, and to me, that's a family value. I think healthcare for all is a family value because it means that you don't have to go on GoFundMe and recruit a bunch of people to make donations to you so that you can pay for medical care. A family value is being able to get the care that you need. So I think trying to push in that direction could maybe appeal to people that are kind of in the middle or on the fence.
Thank you. So I hear you say encouraging voter turnout or increasing the number of voters in the area, and also your messaging of progressive values being tied to what Republicans will consider family values or conservative will consider family values.
Sure.
However, we know that there is a lot of spinning of this information, right? Like there's a lot of misinformation, a lot of taboo with the Green New Deal or Medicare for all, you know, that is socialism and communism and all these isms.
Mm-hmm.
So I encourage you to maybe practice some of those rebuttals so that we can really unify people on values.
Yes, thank you.
Great. Okay, thanks, Joanne. So right now, nobody else has their hand raised, so I am going to take the opportunity to ask a question myself. And that is this. Let's talk just a little bit more broadly about the structure and function of the federal government. And well, I know nobody wants to hear this. Let's just consider for a moment the unthinkable, and that Donald Trump ends up being elected, if you will, for the next 4 years, and you are in Congress. What kind of change to the, right now, current Congress cannot hold him in check. So the question is, what do you think that you could do as a congressperson, and what kind of structural change might you want to see in order to ensure that the checks and balances in the Constitution are actually being enforced in holding a runaway presidency in check?
Yes, well, I think that if he gets reelected, it's going to be very difficult because we're going to have another 4 years of what we've already seen, you know, with just not having any ethical values basically from this president, as far as like he's willing to do whatever he feels like he wants to do on his own. And he doesn't want to follow the courts, and he doesn't want to follow Congress. I think it's just really important to be united with the party, then with the Democratic Party, especially if they regain control, if they, you know, keep control of Congress in the fall, which I'm sure that they will, that we really need to act as a counterbalance towards Donald Trump then for the next 4 years. And it's probably a lot of what's going to be done is pushing things in through the courts too, because like as we've seen already, he hasn't been willing to listen to what Congress is saying, and so a lot of the stuff has had to go to the courts. And so it's really important to maintain all that, though, even though it's frustrating. It's just has to be done because we got to try to prevent him from basically pushing him towards a dictatorship, is what he seems to be doing. So I would work as hard as I could within the Democratic Party and the Democratic members of Congress to try and control that the best we could.
Okay, thank you. I see we have now a couple more hands raised, so we will go to our next question, which is coming from Jerry.
Hi, Chris. I'm glad you are willing to speak to us today. Without putting too much focus on this. I was just hoping you would talk just a little bit about the career that you've had and what have you been doing as your professional life, because you kind of touched on it very briefly.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've done various different jobs. Most of them have been in like retail management type work. Like I worked for Enterprise Rent-A-Car for several years as a branch manager. This was back in the early 2000s. See, for the last 14 years, I've been working for the company that I'm with now as a sales representative. Prior to that, it was just various different jobs, mainly in like retail management type work.
Okay, that's enough for me. Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay.
And, well, I do want to say that you know, a lot of people, you know, that get into the race would tend to come from maybe a bigger type background or something, where maybe they've been a doctor or a lawyer. It seems like those are a lot of the professions of people that get into this. But I think that's another reason why somebody like me should get into this, because like I said, I think Congress should look like the people that it represents. And if everybody in Congress, or the vast majority of them, are lawyers and doctors and things like that, then that's not representing the people. That doesn't look like the people that they represent. And so I think it's important for somebody like me that hasn't been in a profession like that to get in this and to be in Congress. Just like we need various ethnic groups in Congress and different, you know, women and men and different religious backgrounds. I think it's all important.
Great, thanks, Chris. You see, Jerry just he found the reactions button and gave you a thumbs up on that. Okay, next up is Chris, another Chris. Chris, you are unmuted and go ahead and ask your question.
So, Chris, thank you for coming.
Sure.
Several people have mentioned that we're going through what I hope is a unique experience for us. I'm afraid it may not be. And I'm curious what you see as possibilities beyond this response to the virus as we get out the other side of it. Fissures that have been exposed that need to be addressed, opportunities to improve things, and good that could come out of it. And let me just give you one example. That's a pretty huge global question. So the one example that comes to my mind is that we continually use the phrase universal health care when we're referring to health care for Americans. And of course, if a virus comes here from China or Africa or Canada, we can all get treated when we're sick if we have that kind of universal health care. But we really need a global system of health care that can early identify and isolate those sorts of health problems so we don't all get sick. So so that would be one example of something that I hope comes out of this, which is a broader view of the need for global healthcare and cooperation.
Yeah, no, I can see that totally, where that, and it seems like we had some stuff like that in place that the president basically decided that it wasn't worth the cost, and he got rid of some of that stuff. Like there was some kind of a pandemic team that was supposed to be preparing the country for, you know, having a pandemic like we have now, and that team was dismantled. I think it was in 2018, just not too long ago, and then now look what we're going through. What's going on right now has exposed so many shortfalls. Look at how ill prepared we were as far as like the masks go. They told people in the beginning, don't wear a mask. You don't need to wear a mask because unless you have symptoms, because if you have symptoms, then you're protecting other people from you by wearing a mask. But if you don't have symptoms, you don't need to worry about wearing a mask. But then there's other countries like China and a lot of other big countries were saying you should be wearing a mask whether you're sick or not. And then now that a lot of Americans are finding that out, they're going to get masks, and we don't have any. So luckily we have a lot of people that are very using their ingenuity. We got people locally here like I think it's called Central Oregon Mask Makers that have been making masks and face shields for St. Charles and really stepping up to the plate. But But the thing is we should have been prepared for that before it even started, so that would, you know, help to have that ingenuity and to be trying to make masks now, but we needed to have a supply on hand beforehand so that we could protect ourselves right from the beginning. And so I think that, yeah, what we're going through right now, we need to really take a look at the problems that we've had and use this as an opportunity to fix things for the future. And one of those goes back to the universal health care. I mean, we got people that can't even get health care at a normal time because they don't have insurance, or they have insurance but they can't afford the out of pockets. And then where are they coming up with money now when they've just been laid off of a job or don't have any money coming in right now because they can't work? And so it makes it even harder for them to try and get care now. So we really need to learn from what is going on and use it as an opportunity for better change for the future.
Can I ask one real quick follow-up question?
Sure.
So it strikes me that we pretty repeatedly hear ourselves defended as having the best healthcare system in the world. And yet, as a friend of mine said to me yesterday, look at the scoreboard. And we are performing worse than any other country in the world in terms of the number of cases, soon to be number of deaths from this virus. And countries we would consider third world, like Vietnam, are doing quite well in their response. So what is it we can do to our healthcare system beyond treating everybody who's sick to keep people from getting sick?
Well, I think you made a very valid point that, like, yeah, I've seen the numbers too, like about Vietnam and another country that's done very well, and this is South Korea. South Korea started getting hit really hard a little bit before we did, and they were much better prepared than us. So we should really take a look at their system for one, and see how was it that they were so much more prepared than we are. They did massive testing right from the beginning. They were testing, like, I think tens of thousands of people a day. And so they were really able to track where it was spreading to. And by implementing their early isolation standards, they were able to really cut down on the amount, and they peaked fairly early and then started having a decline without getting too out of control compared to a lot of the other countries. And another thing I noticed is, even though they tested so many people, so they saw, you know, so many people that had it, they also did very well on as far as their death rate, when I think it was like a 0.6%, or 0.6, which was way less than the other countries. Like China was like a 3.4. I think the US is like a 4.0 right now. And then they were a 0.6. So that's like way lower. So, I mean, I think we really should take a look at countries like that. I think we need to get past always saying that we're the best at everything, because we are the best at a lot of things, and we can be the best at things when we really put our minds to it and want to be, but we don't have the best of everything right now. A lot of the numbers show that in healthcare, like the infant mortality is fairly high for an industrial country compared to a lot of countries. And so obviously we have room for improvement, and we need to look at what other countries are doing and take the best of what other countries are doing and add it to our country and do it here.
All right, great. Thanks, Chris and Chris. We have one more hand up right now. We are closing in on the hour, but we have Gloria again, who has another question. So Gloria, you're on.
I just want to reinforce what was asked just a moment ago by Chris, the other Chris. And when we start to look at what is underlying, shall I say, the healthcare of the world population, how much of it is related to their food that they have available to them, the nutritional quality of their foods which they use, and how many of these underlying conditions might be related to their food supply. To me, that's a very important question, because our bodies are built with that vital part of our life, and that being food and water. And what's building these bodies, and how does that impact our well-being? And I think it's a very important question. And so I just want to toss that out for our consideration, because I believe we have to really kind of look at that well, I think we really need to look at that. So thank you. So thank you for hearing me.
Yeah, that's a valid point as well. A lot of these countries that are doing better might be doing better because the food they're consuming every day might be healthier that they're eating. They're not eating as much fast food, or they're not taking in as much sugar. Like in the United States, we tend to eat a lot of fast food and we tend to eat a lot of sugar. And you hear it from, I know I've heard it from many doctors, my own doctor included. When this all started happening, he said, the best thing you can do is try to eat the best and healthiest you can and try to build up your immune system. And if you have a strong immune system, then hopefully it'll, fight off the virus in the proper way. And so that's something to look at too, is like a lot of the countries that did better, it could be their food system or their food supply too that is affecting the outcomes.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate you hearing me on this. I think it's really important.
Sure.
It looks like Chris Gardner may have a follow-up or another comment on this, so I'm going to let him back on.
Neither a follow-up nor a comment, but another question in a completely different area. The district that you seek to represent, I think in Oregon, has the largest amount of public lands controlled by Forest Service, BLM, Fish and Wildlife. And often the values that some people, and Ben, for instance, associate with public lands are contrary to the values of the local people in Eastern Oregon. So what are your positions about public lands, about threats you perceive to public lands, about a way to address them, and about a way to build consensus around public lands in Eastern Oregon?
Well, yeah, and I think that's a very difficult issue because, we do have to balance things with, a lot of people around Bend probably, mostly want to use the public lands for recreation, and they don't want it being used for agriculture or anything like that for the most part. And so, but in more rural areas, of course, they do want to use the land more for that. So I think it's very important that we listen to locals and hear what they're saying and use their input when we're thinking of how to use the land, because it is all of our land and we do all need to use it in the proper way. I do think that there should be some areas of land, though, that we do set aside that aren't used for like wild areas, wilderness areas and stuff that are just protected. I think it's very important that we just have a variety of all of those things.
Okay, great. Thank you. So here we are. We're just a few minutes before the hour. Nobody has their hand up right now. So in the absence of other questions, I'd ask you, Chris, now whether you would like to make any closing remarks, and then we can bring this meet and greet to a close.
Okay. Well, I guess, just kind of going back to how I introduced myself is that I just think it's really important that that if, for people that agree that progressive values are what we need, and that we elect more progressives in the fall to join Congress and help push things further to the left. And if people vote for me, I can guarantee that I will be a voice for you. I feel like I will be giving you a seat at the table. I will fight for Medicare for all. I will fight for a Green New Deal. I will fight for LGBTQ equality. I will fight for women's equality and racial justice. I just think all those things are really important, and I hope that I can earn your support and that you will vote for me in the fall. If you choose not to vote for me, I just hope that we can still get a progressive elected, and we can do the best we can, whether Trump gets elected or not. We need to have those progressives in Congress.
Great. Thank you, Chris. Thanks for joining us. I really appreciate it. Sure. And so I think at this point, we can call this good for the day. We will adjourn. Okay. Thank you all for joining us for this.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And thanks for all the questions. I really enjoyed being here. Thanks.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye.